In August 1995, Netscape went public. The company had been incorporated 18 months earlier, in April 1994. Its product, the Netscape Navigator web browser, had been available for less than a year. The company had no earnings. The IPO raised $140 million on the first day and gave Netscape a market capitalization of approximately $2.9 billion. It was, at the time, one of the most successful technology IPOs in American history. It also launched what became known as the dot-com era, the period when the Internet's commercial potential became visible to capital markets in a way that produced both enormous value creation and enormous capital misallocation. Microsoft, watching Netscape's success, responded. The response was Windows 95, released in August 1995, the same month as Netscape's IPO, with Internet Explorer bundled into the operating system. At the time of the Windows 95 release, Internet Explorer was technically inferior to Netscape Navigator in almost every measurable dimension. By 1998, Internet Explorer had overtaken Netscape as the most widely used browser. By 2002, Netscape had effectively ceased to matter as a commercial product. The mechanism by which Internet Explorer overtook a technically superior product is the textbook case of distribution defeating quality in a winner-take-most market. Microsoft's access to approximately 90% of the personal computer market through the Windows operating system meant that a technically inferior product, bundled at zero additional cost into an operating system that was already in use, could reach users at a rate that no standalone product installation could match. The specific thing that the Netscape case illustrates about timing is not that Netscape launched too early or too late. It is that Netscape launched into a market where its competitive advantage, being first, being good, was insufficient protection against a competitor who could move distribution at a pace the quality advantage couldn't match. But the timing question that makes this episode what it is isn't about Netscape's launch. It's about Microsoft's response. And it's about the 6 months that almost weren't 6 months. In 1994, Bill Gates circulated an internal memo at Microsoft titled The Internet Tidal Wave. The memo, written in May 1995, not 1994 as is sometimes cited, identified the Internet as the most important development in computing since the IBM PC and redirected Microsoft's entire product development agenda toward Internet competition. The memo arrived after the key decisions about Windows 95 had already been made. Internet Explorer was rushed into the Windows 95 release, bundled, inferior, and positioned to leverage Microsoft's distribution advantage rather than win on product merit. The 6-month delay that determined everything in this case was not at Microsoft. It was at Netscape. Mark Andreessen, Netscape's co-founder, has said in interviews that the company's original plan was to release Navigator as a commercial product in late 1994, earlier than it actually shipped. The decision to delay the commercial release by several months, while the team refined the product and the business model was finalized, pushed the Navigator launch into early 1995. Those months gave Microsoft time to observe what Navigator was doing, assess the market response, and begin its own response. Had Navigator shipped in late 1994, before Microsoft's strategic recognition of the Internet as a competitive threat, the gap between Netscape's market establishment and Microsoft's response might have been wider. Not decisive, given Microsoft's distribution advantage, but wider. Have you ever been in a launch decision where the argument for a few more months of preparation was compelling, and where the question of what the competitive landscape would look like when you shipped was never fully evaluated? Leave a comment. The timing decision that this episode is really about is not the Netscape case. Netscape's outcome was probably determined by structural forces that a few months would not have resolved. The timing case that makes the 6-month question most instructive is Amazon Web Services. Amazon had been developing the internal infrastructure management capabilities that would eventually become AWS throughout the early 2000s. The decision to offer those capabilities as an external commercial service, to become the cloud computing platform that would change the economics of every software business in the world, was made in approximately 2003. The AWS commercial service launched in 2006. At the time of the launch, no major competitor was offering a comparable service at scale. Google and Microsoft were not yet in the market with equivalent products. The delay between the 2003 internal decision and the 2006 commercial launch was not 6 months. It was approximately 3 years. But within that 3-year window, There were specific decision points, moments where AWS could have launched earlier or later, and each of those moments had competitive implications that were not obvious at the time. What the AWS case illustrates about delay is the inverse of the Netscape case. Amazon used its lead time to build infrastructure that made the eventual product competitive at a level that a faster launch would not have achieved, in a market where no competitor had yet arrived to make speed decisive. The delay served Amazon. A faster launch might have produced a weaker product in a market that wasn't yet equipped to absorb it, creating the impression that cloud computing wasn't viable, which might have invited competitors to define the category more favorably. If the specific mechanism, how the same delay can serve one company and harm another, depending on whether the delay builds a competitive advantage or simply gives competitors time to arrive, is what makes this channel worth your time. The like is the direct signal. The engineers who built Netscape Navigator did not fail. They built a product that was technically superior to its competition, that grew rapidly, that defined an era of internet use, and that was eventually displaced by a product that was technically inferior but distributionally dominant. The engineers who built Internet Explorer 1.0 did not succeed because of the quality of their product. They succeeded because their product was attached to an operating system that was already on 90% of the computers that mattered. The lesson of the Netscape AIE case is not release earlier or release later. It is more specific. Before making any timing decision, the question to ask is not, is the product ready? It is, what is the competitive landscape 6 months from now if I delay? And what is it 6 months from now if I don't? And which of those landscapes is better for us? For Netscape in 1994, the competitive landscape 6 months from now if we delay was, Microsoft has observed our success and has begun responding. The product improvement from those 6 months was real. The market position change was also real, and in the direction that was worse for Netscape. For Amazon in 2004, the competitive landscape 6 months from now if we delay was, the market is still uncontested, and the product will be better. The delay continued to be the right call until the first moment when a competitor arrived, and no competitor arrived until after AWS's market position was established. What the delay of 6 months actually decided, in the specific cases where a 6-month timing difference was consequential, was almost never visible in advance. It was visible in retrospect, once the competitive landscape that the delay had created became the landscape that subsequent decisions had to operate in. This is the specific limitation of timing analysis. It is available in retrospect and structurally difficult in advance, because the competitive response to a launch decision is a function of when the launch happens, and the when of the launch is the thing being decided. The practical thing, when making a timing decision about any significant launch, product, or announcement, the analysis should include an explicit scenario for the competitive landscape at the proposed launch date and at 2 alternative dates, one 3 to 6 months earlier and one 3 to 6 months later. Not a general assessment of, is the market ready, but a specific analysis of, who else is building this, where are they in their development, and does our timing put us ahead of or behind their readiness? That analysis is imperfect. The competitive intelligence it requires is often incomplete, but it is the analysis that turns a timing decision from a question about product readiness into a question about competitive positioning, which is the question that actually determines what the timing of a launch decides. The next episode looks at a case where a single partnership decision, specifically the refusal of one, shaped everything that followed in ways that neither party fully anticipated. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical Stoicism.